Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Intrepid Museum's new virtual live programming. Thank you all so much for joining us for our high-flying design program today. We are so happy that you're all here, and we'll be answering a number of your questions throughout the program. So my name is Alicia, and I'm an educator at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in New York City, and I'll be your host today for the program. And just as a reminder, the museum's live streams are free. And if you'd like to support us in delivering this exciting new content, please click on the link in the comments or the description below. So again, feel free to use the chat today. Say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Let us know if you've ever been to the Intrepid before. And of course, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat as well. So once again, my name's Alicia, and I'm an educator at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum, where our mission is to honor our heroes, educate the public, and inspire our youth. And today we are going to be talking about aviation and how the designs of airplanes allow them to fly up in the sky. But before we get started, I want to ask you to grab two things if you would like to do an activity at the end with me. And we are going to be making a really, really neat paper airplane that you're going to be able to tell it how to do different things. So what you're going to need for that are an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and a pair of scissors. Now, preferably not a piece of paper that you are going to need like a homework assignment or something. Just a plain sheet of printer paper is perfect. And if you want to use scissors, you can. Otherwise, you can just use your fingers to tear it as well. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so for those of you who may not be familiar, this is the Intrepid Museum. We are located on the west side of Manhattan in the Hudson River in a historic World War II aircraft carrier, the USS Intrepid. And as you can see in this picture, it is really, really big. Now, our ship is 913 feet long. Now, that is so big. If you stood it up on its end like this, it would be as tall as a New York City skyscraper. And it's also so long that you could play 3 games of football on top, all at the same time. So 3 Super Bowls up there. Now, it was constructed way back in 1943 for a very specific purpose. It was made during a time where we were fighting countries all the way across oceans. And we didn't want to have to launch our planes over here in America and then have to fly them all the way across the water to get over there because, well, that would take way too much fuel and time. So we created things like the Intrepid. Now, I am curious, what do we call something like that? You can tell me in the chat if you happen to know. What type of ship is the Intrepid? What do we call a ship that lets us transport or carry a bunch of airplanes while out in the water and even help them to take off and to land when they're out there in the ocean? Anyone know what that's called? Can you tell me in the chat? All right, well, if you said an aircraft carrier, you would be right. So again, not only can ships like this carry aircraft, but they also let us launch and land just like a floating airport out at sea. So our ship was in service from 1943 to 1974, and it later became a museum in 1982. So of course, being a museum, we like to display lots and lots of cool things that we hope you can come visit us and see someday. But specifically, we like to display things like this. Chairs. Yeah. All right. Now, I know you might be thinking, okay, why am I looking at chairs? Why do you have chairs on display? Well, these are artifacts, and they can tell us a lot about what life was like on board the ship. So some of them look pretty common. You know, they might look similar to chairs that you might even have in your house or at work or school. And some of them might look a little more complicated too. But looking at these chairs is a really great way for us to examine a variety of jobs that people had on board the ship like Intrepid. So when we take a closer look, we can make some guesses. We can really think about what they were used for based on how they look, or maybe if we have seen them somewhere before. And we can also think about where they might have been on the ship. So everyone, I want you to take a second and I want you to point on the screen for me to which chair you think is the most boring. So which of these chairs, look closely, which do you think is the most normal, boring chair that maybe you've even sat on in an office or at school? So when I'm looking at this, to me, this one on the end here looks the most boring and typical to me. Maybe you were pointing at that one too. Maybe not. But this is a pretty standard looking office chair. And it tells us that just like on land, people had regular office jobs while they were at sea on the Intrepid as well. And not everyone was a pilot. Not everyone had to lift or lower the anchor. Not everyone was, up swabbing the deck or anything. There was plenty of important paperwork that had to be done as well. So that is just one type of job that we might find on board. Now, I want you to point to the screen again and tell me which chair you think is the most comfortable chair. Now, which of these do you think would be the most comfy to sit on? Maybe something you can imagine curling up on, maybe with a good book. It's soft, it's cozy. Point at that one for me. And I'll tell you, when I look at these chairs, I think that brown one in the center looks the most comfortable. In fact, to me, it kind of looks like a nice comfy recliner chair that you might have in your living room, or maybe even one of those comfy movie theater seats. So believe it or not, these were used specifically for pilots in their ready rooms. So pilots had one of the most stressful jobs on board the Intrepid. So the ready room was designed to be as comfortable as possible. And I'll show you what a picture of the ready room looks like here. So here's a picture of a bunch of the pilots in their seats, in those comfy brown seats. And you can think of the ready room, again, as kind of like a classroom where they would all learn about their missions. So underneath the seats, they had little lockers for their things, just like you might have at school, and even desks that folded up and over for them to take notes if they needed to. And they would sit in those chairs to prepare for their flights. So again, it's kind of like a school chair, but a really, really comfy one, which I don't know, that might be a problem for me. I might fall asleep if it was, a long lesson. Now, after the pilots were in these chairs, though, they got into another chair, and that would be this one. Now, this chair right next to it, does anyone know what a type of chair this is? Can anyone tell me, maybe in the chat, what do you call a chair that looks like this? It's kind of this big, sort of light greenish looking one right to the right of it. It's got lots of straps on it. It's kind of a scary looking chair, honestly. But I bet if we think about it, all those straps, all that padding might have something to do with why those chairs were used or how they were used. Does anyone have an idea? Wonder what a chair like that's called. Well, if you said it was an ejection chair, there you go, an ejection seat. I see you, be happy. Very nice. So yeah, this is called an ejection chair. So you see, a long, long time ago, if something bad happened to your plane, you actually had to climb out of your cockpit. You had to climb out onto the wing while it was still up in the air, and you had to jump off, and hopefully you had your parachute on you that day, and you could then float down to safety into the water. As you can imagine, yeah, that's a super, super dangerous thing to do. And so here is actually an image of an ejection chair being used. But the ejection chair, if you would imagine, now is safer than climbing out onto your wing. So imagine, if you will, you've got the plane, it's going forward very fast, and the tail of it, the back end of it, if you were to climb out and then go down in your parachute, it might get tangled up in your parachute right after you jump. So these ejection seats were created. You would pull a handle either on the bottom or on the top, and it would shoot you up really, really fast and far away from your plane, so that then you could go down and float back down to safety with your parachute into the water, but a little bit further away from your plane. So it was a much safer way, of course, to be using that. Now, if you landed in the ocean, sometimes you didn't land near your own ship, and then another ship would have to come to pick you up instead. But then you think, oh no, all of my stuff is back on the Intrepid. I, need to get back there to get to all of my stuff. That's where I live. So eventually you would have to transfer ships. And that is where this next one comes in. So the one all the way on the end there, that chair is called the Highline chair. And it works kind of like a zip line, if you've ever seen one of those. So I have actually a little string here I can show you. If you would imagine, right, you've got a rope that goes between the two of them. All right. So it goes through the top on a little hole in the chair, and it would connect from ship to ship. So here's actually a picture of it. I can show you a little bit more clearly there. So you've got a picture of it there. Right in the center is that Highline chair. All right. So there's a hole in the top of it. You've got a very tight rope. Someone's sitting in it there, kind of a wild ride. And then you would go zipping back and forth between the two of them, just like that. But there's actually a funny story about this sea. So the Intrepid was a really big ship, right? And it was known for having some really great food. And something else really exciting, another really fun, exciting food, ice cream. So sometimes the ship that would pick up a pilot who had to bail out would say, all right, if you want your pilot back, you need to send us over some ice cream first. Now, the crew of the Intrepid was not about sharing their ice cream. They thought, no, 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 this is like something special to us. We want to keep as much ice cream as we can. So one time this happened, and they said, okay, you need to send this ice cream over. But the crew again was like, no, we are going to play a little trick on them. So they decided to send over some ice cream, but they weighted it down with soap shavings. Now, when the other ship realized that, of course, they got kind of mad. So to get back at the Intrepid, while they were sending the pilot back over across that cable, that very tight line, they moved their ship a bit closer. And that made that cable slack like that. And what do you think happened to that pilot who was in the seat as that slack went down? Oh, he got dunked into the water. So I guess you could say it looks like that pilot got an extra serving of sprinkles, maybe. Or I guess you could say maybe he got soft served, maybe. All right, so my friends, before we move on, does anyone have any questions about the Intrepid or life on the Intrepid or anything like that so far? Do we have any questions? What is the black and green chair on the far end? What a great question. So you see right next to the Highline chair, there is a black and green one. I will make this a little bigger so you can see it. And that is actually, if you look closely, a dentist chair. Yeah. So I guess arguably we could say the ejection seat was pretty scary, but to me, I think that dentist chair was even scarier. I'm not a fan of going to the dentist. But we have that chair on display again to illustrate that we really had a community at sea. So people were at sea for 6 to 9 months at a time. And in case somebody got, if they had a toothache, if they needed to have some dental work done while they were overseas, of course, everyone needs checkups. You're supposed to every 6 months or so. So we had doctors, we had dentists, we had people that had to take care of all of the sailors while they were at sea. And so we have that there to illustrate that. Great question. All right, any other questions? How many people served on the Intrepid? All right. So again, 6 to 9 months is how long they were there. And they had 3,000 men at any given time on board the Intrepid. The average age of the sailors there was about 19 too. So a lot of young men for the very first time in their lives leaving home, going very, very far away from their friends and family. So again, this idea of a community at sea was very important. They formed a new family while they were on the ship and made really good friends because they had to look out for each other. So 3,000 people, a lot of people on board. All right, any other questions? All right, so let's continue on then. Now, the oldest plane that we have on board the ship at our museum is from World War II. And you might have noticed that the wings on this plane look a little bit unusual. So this is the Avenger. All right. Now, look at this picture. Look at these wings. Does anyone know why these wings are like that? Let me know in the chat if you know. But let's think about this. Do you think that they're broken? Because, honestly, when I look at it, they're not out and extended like a normal plane that you might see at an airport. Maybe you've seen birds sometimes tuck their wings back when they dive, they fold back, or maybe they're just sitting there, they have their wings folded back. But this is an airplane, not a bird. So we as a museum, of course, could intentionally choose to display airplanes, even if they were broken. Like maybe we're trying to recreate a scene here where they're doing a repair on the airplane or something. So we want to bring that to life. But, and I see it in the chat here, but the real reason why the planes have foldable wings is to save space on the ship. So everyone, if you put your arms out for me, side to side, all right, try this at home. If you put your arms out and you kind of rotate side to side for me, rotate around, you're going to take up a lot of space, right? You might be bumping into things. You might, it's just taking up a lot of space here. But if you fold your arms back or down or to the sides in, you're a lot narrower. So by doing this on the ship, the planes, you can fit more of them inside of a smaller space. just like the area that you can see on screen there. So that's called the hangar deck. This is where they would store a lot of the planes before sending them off to fight. And you can think of the hangar kind of like a big garage, especially during World War II, and they can store about 100 of these big planes on the ship between the hangar deck and up on the flight deck. So really, it's about saving some of that space because those wings get pretty big. Now, everyone, looking at that massive machine there, you might have also noticed that the Avenger is pretty clunky. So let's pull that up a little bit bigger there. So yeah, it's a pretty large machine, and it actually shared a nickname with a very famous Thanksgiving meal. Anyone guess what that meal is called? Anyone know what you eat around Thanksgiving? It's kind of big and awkward when it flies. Anyone know the name of that bird? It's a turkey. Yes, because it folded its wings back, and it also was kind of big and clunky when it flew too. Now, looking at this, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, how on earth does this get up into the sky? How does it fly? How does all of that metal stay up there? Well, this plane, and really all planes, are able to fly by using a few forces. And the one that we'll talk about is basically what I already just said. It's the opposite of what you think we would need to fly, and it is gravity. There it is. All right. So it's the reason that something big and heavy wants to be on the ground. It is the force that brings us down. So the heavier you are, the more gravity is going to work against you here on Earth when you try to fly and go up in the air. And that certainly, of course, applies to very large airplanes like the Avenger. So it might sound weird, but we actually need gravity to make sure that we don't just float away here on Earth. It helps us to maintain control of how high we do go and when we're flying. So do you notice this twirly thing in the front of the airplane? What is that called? Does anyone know what that thing is called? Kind of spins around. Tell me in the chat if you know. It kind of looks like a spinning fan. Right? It spins really fast. Sometimes older planes might have one or maybe even two or sometimes even four of them. I don't even know what that thing is called on the front of that plane. Spins around. All right, so yeah, that is called a propeller. Very nice. Thank you, everyone. And now you might have heard of a propeller also being on a boat or a ship. And certainly we have one here. This is actually one of the propellers that was on the Intrepid. So it spins and it pushes the water through, or pushes the ship through the water. And believe it or not, air is similar to water in that it is also considered to be a fluid. Now, that's not to be confused with like liquid like water, which is also a fluid, but air moves like water in a very fluid way. So when you're swimming, right, and you're underwater, you're moving the water, you're pushing it back behind you in order to go forward. And it's the very same idea with airplanes and, of course, these propellers. They scoop the air and they move it, pushing it back behind them as they spin, which then, of course, allows them to move forward. And that, my friends, is our second force, rather, and that is thrust. So that is that forward motion that we want to achieve when we move. And we can do that using things like propellers on the Avenger. But you might also be thinking to yourself now, okay, hey now, I have seen an airplane. Airplanes that I'm used to seeing do not look anything like that. The airplanes I have seen do not have propellers. So how do they move? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here is another type of plane. So this is something called a jet plane. And this one in particular is called the Fury. And yes, you would be absolutely right. It does look a bit different than the last one that we saw. This one, you might notice, does not have a propeller on the front of it like the Avenger did. Now, jet planes generate their thrust to move forward a little bit differently. So everyone, I want you to try something together with me. I want you to take a deep breath in and then let it out. So that is how jet planes work, believe it or not. They take a deep breath in, the front, then they compress it, and they mix it all up with jet fuel, and then they set it on fire, they ignite it, and then it comes out the back as fire. And that is another way to generate a lot of thrust. So everyone, I am now going to actually ask you a question. Here we go. And this is definitely interactive, so please put your answer in the chat. Here we go. I want to know, which plane do you think is faster? Tell me in the chat. Do you think it's the Avenger, the one you see on the left, the first one? If you think it's the Avenger, type 1. And if you think that it's the Fury, the second one that we saw on the right there, type 2. And I want you to really think about things like how big it is, the shape, the type of plane. All of these things really do contribute to its speed. And so again, I want you to tell me in the chat by typing 1 or 2, which of these planes do you think is faster? Type 1 for the Avenger or type 2 for the Fury? All right, so let's see. I see 2s. I see a bunch of 2s. I see people saying Fury. Oh, a lot of people are saying Fury. All right. Yeah, all right. I think you guys got the idea. And yes, so if you said the Fury, you would be right. So as you can see, the Fury is a lot sleeker. It's a lot more streamlined than the Avenger. And so that third force of flight is something called, dun dun dun, drag. And that's really anything that gets in the way of air. So everyone, again, if you want to try this at home, if you move your hand like this, okay, you can feel the air resistance on your hand while you're doing that. So all of the air that's coming into contact with your flat palm there is causing drag. Your hand is causing the drag of all of that. So comparing these two planes, the Avenger and the Fury, you can also really see how technology improved, since the Avenger was active during World War II and the Fury was around later in the 1950s and 60s. So the Fury is much more compact and sleeker. It's what we call aerodynamic. It has less air resistance running into it than the Avenger, which of course was much bigger and wider. So that lets it fly much, much faster. But the last force that we want to talk about has something to do with this right here. So do you see this red shape on the side of the wing here? So this shape is something called an airfoil, and it's what helps the planes to go up. So our last force is the thing that gets us off the ground, and it is something called lift. All right, so I want you to imagine, everyone, that your plane is moving forward very quickly. The air is moving towards the wing, and it's actually going to get split. So when it gets split over the wing, that airfoil shape, it's going to go both over the top very, very quickly, and then also under the bottom a bit slower. And it's that difference in speed that causes a difference in pressure. So there's going to be high pressure on the bottom and then lower pressure on the top. And that high pressure wants to get to that low pressure area. So the pressure starts to build up on the bottom, and that's actually what pushes it up and causes the wing and the plane to go up. And again, that is called lift. So you can kind of think of it like this. If you imagine that you are in a grocery store, standing in a very long line to check out, you've been there forever, and suddenly another checkout line opens up next to you, and there's no one in that line. What do you think is going to happen? What would you want to do in that circumstance, right? You're standing in this line. Oh, you're holding all of your heavy stuff. You've got, I don't know, soda and toilet paper and all that stuff. And that other thing opens up and you're like, oh, well, I know from living life that what happens is everyone wants to rush over there. I personally would want to do that too. So yeah, we'd want to go for the open lane. You wouldn't have to keep waiting in line. You could just get your groceries. You could get out of the store sooner. So the air wants to do that too. It wants to be in that low pressure area on top of that wing. So the faster you go, the more air you can get to go over the wing and the more lift you can have. And on the other hand, the more drag you have, so the more stuff that's in the way of the air, then the gravity can take over more, and then you can actually land. So with these four forces in mind, we can also think about how planes don't just go forward. They also move, right? They turn left, they turn right. They can also do things like corkscrews and loops and barrel rolls. And that has to do with some of the flight surfaces. So the different areas that the air can hit on the plane and interact with, those are the flight surfaces. And how it interacts with the air and hits it is how they are able to move. So again, if the plane is uneven, maybe there's more drag on one side than another, well, it's going to cause the plane to not fly straight. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you want it to do some really cool stuff. So we are going to take a look at some of the flight surfaces here. Now, on the back of the plane, horizontally on, sorry, right here first, these are on the back of the wings. These are called ailerons, and they're what give you that roll motion. So you can imagine like a dog rolling over to the left or to the right. That's that rolling motion. And actually, the word aileron means little wing in French. So it's an easy way to remember that too on the wing. Now, on the back of the plane, this horizontally here, there are some flaps here that are called elevators, and they help to move the plane up and down in the pitch motion with the nose going up and down. And I like to remember that kind of like your singing pitch. You can take it up and down. Then on the back of the tail here, you can see that yellow with black stars. That's called the rudder, and that controls the yaw motion. So that's the side-to-side motion. So imagine if you're shaking your head, no, left and right like that. So all of these things together here, they all work together to create dynamics and, of course, allow you to do really, really neat things with your plane. All right, my friends. So does anyone have any questions so far about these 4 forces or anything like that? Anything about the planes that we've discussed so far? Any other questions so far? Did they have their own bunkers, or were they all grouped together? Do you mean the people who were on board? If there was sailors were living in the same rooms, maybe is that what you meant? So the sailors, actually, the 3,000 of them, they did not all stay in one area together. No, they actually had beds that were spread out throughout the ship depending on what their job was. So, for example, a captain's quarters might be very fancy, might be in an area that maybe is a little quieter for them, a little bit nicer beds. But someone who perhaps manned the guns, right, at a moment's notice, they might be called to get out there and start to fight an enemy aircraft. They would actually have to sleep a little bit closer to the guns. And unfortunately, that means they're right below the flight deck. So, of course, when the planes are coming in and landing, you hear all of that right above your head. They also slept in cots that were, 3, 4 high, like bunk beds, suspended by chains. So imagine if it's bumpy water, they're swinging all over the place. Also, if you're on a lower bunk, maybe if you have a bunk bed at home, you know this, if someone has to climb up to a top one, well, they're climbing up over everyone else. So that's not very comfortable. But yeah, there's a lot of noise for that type of position. So depending on what role you played in that community at sea, you would be living in slightly different areas. So no, they did not all sleep together in the same place. Great question, though. All right, any other questions? How many people fit in the Avenger? All right, another great question. So the Avenger is a really, really big plane. Actually, you can see it right behind me here. Perfect. But it actually only fit 3 people, only 3 crew members. So there was a pilot, of course, who piloted the plane and also was in charge of when they were going to be dropping things. It was a torpedo bomber, so it dropped those. There was also a turret gunner who sat behind him. So he would fire the gun away at enemy fighters that were maybe behind them or below them. And then there was also a radio man. So that person would be on the radio. Later, when they had radar on the planes, they would also be in charge of that. But he would also be there kind of in the belly of the plane to arm torpedoes or bombs down under there. And he also had a gun in the back as well. But the pilot actually was separate from the other 2. So those 2 kind of worked together, and then the pilot would be up there focusing on the mission too. So 3 people. Another great question. All right, and one more question. How many planes fit on the Intrepid? All right, so there were 100 of these guys up here that fit on the Intrepid. Again, this is between the hangar deck and the flight deck. And again, folding the wings back was so important to be able to fit them all on there. And of course, with 100 of them on there too, you can imagine that it takes a lot of people to maintain them. So, there would be people constantly checking the maintenance to make sure that they were up to tip-top shape when they went to go fly. You'd have to refuel them. If anything, happened, if the wing got shot, they'd have to patch up those holes. So it's constant maintenance. We had very large aircraft elevators too that would bring them between the 2 flight decks. So you can imagine just a constant rotation of these planes coming in, getting refueled, going around and then extending their wings in order to take off during World War II. All righty, my friends. Oh, one more question. Okay. What happened if a plane flew off the Intrepid's runway? Well, hopefully, if it flew off the runway, it was up in the air. Hopefully, they were able to build up enough speed. And we're actually going to get to talk about that in just a second with the catapult. But yeah, so hopefully, when they flew off the Intrepid's runway, they were up in the air and going off to their mission. So let's talk about that, actually. Great segue. All right. Now, remember, everyone, and actually, it's perfect because here is my next image for you of a plane taking off on the runway. Remember, I told you that we used to launch and land planes off the Intrepid and that it's 913 feet long. Well, runways at airports are actually much, much longer than that. Planes, of course, they need to be able to build up the speed that and thrust to generate lift, to get up in the air, remember? So we talked about that to get up there. But planes on the Intrepid would actually use steam catapults. So they would get shot off the front of the ship, kind of like a slingshot. You can imagine that. And it would help them to build up that speed much, much quicker. So you can actually see in this image, there's that track underneath the plane there. Along the bottom of it. And so the planes would attach onto it, and then it would shoot it forward and launch it right off the front of the ship. Now, landing, though, is just as difficult because, again, we don't have a long runway for them to come in and land and slow down and come to a nice, calm end there. So they had to do something a little bit different. And the thing that they had to do is something called a tail hook. All right, now here is a picture of a tail hook on the back of a plane. This is the tracer on board our flight deck. So you can see it's that black and white hook-shaped thing. Kind of looks like a black and white candy cane. It's got that hook shape to it. And it's circled there in red for you. So this tail hook would drop down, and then it would snag onto a cable to slow you down from, say, 160 miles an hour to 0 in just 2 seconds. And then, of course, you'd be able to land safely. So imagine you were playing a game of Red Rover and you got stopped, only a lot faster and a lot harder. So probably not the most comfortable thing, but that's better than, not being able to land, I would say. So here again, you can see a plane coming in for a landing. So on the left, there's that tail hook. It's pointed to with a red arrow. It's a little bit difficult to see there, but it's that little hook that's dropped down on the left there. And then on the right, you can see the cable that it would catch onto to slow it down and stop it. There's its Red Rover there. So another successful landing, albeit quite an abrupt one. You can imagine that feeling of stopping. But again, it's better than flying off the end. Now, helicopters, though, work a little bit differently because they have propellers on the top of the aircraft. So this red and white one that you see here is called the Sea Guardian. It was a Coast Guard rescue helicopter, and it could actually land on the water. You can see the buoys on the outside over the wheels to help it float, and it would help to rescue people from the water that way. So it'd actually fly down vertically to save them and then fly back up and away again. So helicopters are what we call VTOL aircraft, or vertical takeoff and landing, because they can go vertically up and down, and they can even hover in place. So the blades on top, they spin, of course. That gives it the lift that they need, and they act similar to the airplane's wings in that regard. But in addition to the rotors on top, the helicopters also have a rotor in the back that you can see. So the rear rotor propeller there can face all different directions, and that helps to give the helicopter the thrust that it needs then to move forward or backwards or even sideways. But believe it or not, there are also some airplanes that can do that too, and they are super, super cool. So this is the Harrier jet, and you can see actually the vents right in the, you can't really see it because I just put my thing over it, but right in the center of it, right underneath the wings, there are some vents there, and it kind of looks like ribs or even like fish gills, I think. But those are really cool because they can be turned down to direct the air down, which of course would help the plane to go up. And then they can also be rotated backwards once they're in the air, then to help it go forward again by pushing all of that air behind them. So they also can land straight down as well. So with the Harrier and with VTOL aircraft like this, it's really the best of both worlds. They don't even need a runway to take off and land. Now, we do have 2 other planes that I'm going to show you. Just based on how they look, you can probably get a sense of how they move and their top speeds. This lovely black one here is the A-12, the Ox Cart. It was actually a CIA spy plane, and it was the fastest, still is, the fastest plane ever built. At top speeds, it can go Mach 3, so that is 3 times faster than the speed of sound. That is over 2,100 miles per hour. And it could go so fast that it could fly from Washington, D.C. to California in just over an hour. Now, that is a trip that usually takes 5 hours. So that gives you a sense of just how fast it is. The pilot who was inside of this actually had to wear a pressure suit because he was going so fast. But if you look at this plane here, do you see a lot of surfaces that might cause drag? Not really, no. So as you can guess, as you can see, it's very smooth. It's very sleek, that shape. So that helps it to go very, very fast. It doesn't have a lot of drag at all. And likewise, on site, we also have this plane. So this is the fastest commercial jet ever made. This is the Concorde, and it can fly at Mach 2, so not quite as fast as the A-12, but still really, really fast. That is twice the speed of sound. And you can see the shape, again, how pointy it is, that very streamlined, sleek look. And it's also got very, very little drag, so it can go very, very, very fast. Again, that's almost 1,400 miles an hour. And that made the 7-hour flight from New York City to London in just 2 hours and 54 minutes. So just under 3 hours for a normally 7-hour flight. Now, with this in mind, everyone, about flight surfaces and how planes move in relation to drag, you might recall earlier that I asked you to grab a sheet of paper and some scissors, and we are going to make a really cool airplane together. If you missed that part of the program and you're just tuning in now, no worries at all. Just grab an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Any kind of paper will do. It can be anything. It can have something printed on it, or it can just be a plain sheet of paper like this one. So just grab that and a pair of scissors. And again, if you aren't able to use scissors, that is okay too. You can just make some tears with your fingers when we get to that part. So just in case we do have some friends who want to go and grab that stuff really quick, let's see if there's any more questions I can answer in the meantime before we hop into the planes. Do we have any questions? Did the Intrepid ever use nuclear power? I think the answer is no, but just curious. So the answer is no. Nuclear carriers came along in 1972. And you might recall that the ship actually was decommissioned in 1974. So it was only around for about 2 years. And honestly, to have to retrofit a ship that big would just be a nightmare. But we do on site have a Cold War era submarine that carried nuclear missiles. So come check that out if you're into nuclear power. All right. Any other questions? Did American Harriers also use detonation cords in the cockpit glass? They did use detonation cords. I don't know too much specifically about it, but I do know that yes, they did use that. The Harriers are honestly just a really, really cool plane. And you might wonder why. If they can just land vertically and everything, wouldn't it save so much just time and energy to not have to have catapults on a ship? Why don't you just have tons of Harriers on your plane, right? Or on your aircraft carrier? But honestly, the Harrier planes, they are not, because of that vent situation that can rotate like that, they can't go as fast and they can't carry as much. So they're not really great for combat situations. But the technology is just super amazing. So great question, though. I'd love to learn more about Harriers myself. I think they're really cool. Any other questions? Why don't we use the Concorde anymore? All right, another great question. So the Concorde was in service from 1976 to 2003. They retired them in 2003 for a few different reasons. The first of which, well, the main one really was money. So you can imagine that a plane that goes that fast is pretty special, and they knew that. So to purchase a ticket to fly on the Concorde, it was a luxury. It cost so much money. And so, yeah, very, very expensive. And eventually, they just couldn't get enough passengers to offset the cost of operating them. So it was mainly a cost issue. and also just to maintain them, it was costing a lot of money. The technology started getting a little bit old after 30 years to maintain and run them. So eventually, they just figured it's not cost effective to continue to have these people that maybe don't want to pay the prices and to have to keep making the parts and everything. But there definitely is something to the idea behind supersonic flight. People are very into that now. So there are a number of companies at the moment, including NASA, who are looking into a better way to operate supersonic flights like that commercially. So who knows? Maybe we will someday be able to experience something like that again, even though they're not around anymore. All right. And one more question. How many people can fit on the Intrepid? So again, there were 3,000 people who served on the Intrepid at any given time. Today, there's actually aircraft carriers that can hold over 5,000 people. I don't know how many people, if you were to cram everyone in, and if everyone stood shoulder to shoulder, this is a good thought experiment. I don't know how many people that would be, but comfortably and how many actually served, it was about 3,000. Now this is an Essex class carrier. The Ford class carriers, like I mentioned, which is ones that they use now, can hold over 5,000 though. So those are even bigger and they have more people. Another awesome question. All right, my friends. So let's move on to our paper airplane activity. So let's see. I'm going to swap out my shot here. Here we go. Alrighty. So again, I asked you to have a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and a pair of scissors. So we are going to create a very cool paper airplane here that you can manipulate to move however you want based on some of those flight surfaces that we talked about. So the first thing you want to do is you take your piece of paper here, and if we were to look at it, you can, hold it this way, up and down, or vertically like this. We want to make a fold that is the long way, all right? So if you say this is hamburger and this is hot dog, that's how I learned it. You want to do a hot dog fold. So you're going to fold it in half long ways, just like that, and crease it right down the center, all right? So you've got a long piece of paper that is folded in half long ways. Once again, paper folded in half long ways. All right, there you go. You're already almost done. Okay, not really. So now what you want to do is take the top two corners up here. You're going to fold them into that center line. So it's going to look like this. You're going to fold it down, and it's going to form a little triangle, or a smaller triangle on the right side, just like that. And you're going to do the same thing on this side as well. So again, take this outer corner, fold it in and down to that center line that you just made, and crease that down. So now, once you folded those two corners down, it's going to look kind of like a triangle on top. So again, if you had your paper up like this, you just took the two outer edges and you folded them down like that. All right. Next step, you're going to take the outer corners of both sides and you're going to fold those into that center line. So it's going to look like this. Take this bottom corner of your triangle here, fold it in like that so that it meets that center line here. Just like that. So if you had your triangles up in the top, you're going to fold it down just like that. And then do the same thing on the other side. So again, take this corner out here, fold it into the center, give it a nice crisp fold down the side. So now you're going to have this kind of delta shape here. All right, this is actually kind of what the Star Trek or the Space Force logo looks like, right? That nice delta shape. All right, so we have folded those outer edges in. Now what you want to do is just fold it in half. All the folds that you just made, you're going to just fold it in half like this. So you're going to keep all of those folds on the inside. And when you fold it in half, it'll be just like a nice clean sheet on the outside. So again, you have all the folds there. You're just going to fold it over itself like this. So now we've got this sort of triangular pointy shape right here. All right, and then the next thing you want to do is take the top edge of both sides, and you're going to fold that down to the bottom edge, just like this. So this is similar perhaps to how you might have normally fold a paper airplane, but if you'll notice, all the folds and everything are going to be on the inside of this. So it's actually going to help it to reduce some of the drag. So again, you're going to do the same thing on the other side. You've got this triangular shape here. You're going to take the top edge and just fold it down. It's going to look like that. And look at how just pointy and sleek and streamlined, right? This kind of looks like the Concorde that I was just showing you. There we go. All right, so this is the plane itself, all right? So we have this great, very, very clean white shape here. Again, it kind of reminds me of the Concorde, and very, very simple. Now, I told you before to have some scissors, right? So this is where, right now, actually, you can stop and throw this if you want. You're going to notice it goes pretty far, pretty fast, very, very clean throw, pretty straight. But if you want to have a little bit of fun with it, this is where the scissors come in. Now, you are welcome, again, to just use your fingers to tear this if you want. But using your scissors here, right on the back of the wings, right back here, we are going to be cutting some flaps there that will allow it to do some little maneuvers, however you want it to go. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your scissors or your fingers, and you are going to cut slits. You're going to cut just 2 slits, just like this. I'll show you a little closer. So I have cut them. I have cut them right like here, the center of this section of the wing. And now it has this little thing. Now, you don't want to fold this. You just want to kind of bend it. And I'll start by just bending it slightly up so that when it's like this, you'll notice, see how it's kind of coming up here? You want it to just sort of come up just slightly, just like that. All right. And then we'll do the other thing or the same thing on the other side as well. So again, I'm going to cut a little bit of slits here, right in the center here. And again, these are going to act like those flaps on the back. So I can push that up as well. And then give it a throw and see what happens. And then see what happens if you push them both down, right? Or if you really want to get crazy, see what happens if you put one of them up and one of them down. So experiment with that, everyone. Experiment with what it looks like to do all of these different things. See what happens if you have them both up, have them both down, and tell us what happens. Tell us how it looks like. Tell us what it all has come out to be for you. And we would love to know how it comes out. You can let us know by sending us a picture. You can tag us on social media. We would love to see what you've created. And even if you want to do a video and show us how you've done it, that would be really cool as well. All right, my friends. So thank you so much again for joining us today. That concludes our program of High Flying. Here I am. That concludes our program of High Flying Design. Do we have any last minute questions before we wrap up? I'd love to just see if we do. Do we still use propeller planes? Yes, actually, we absolutely still use propeller planes, actually. In fact, propeller planes are more efficient in terms of fuel and cost, and they're actually much cheaper to build than jet planes. So they are by no means as fast and powerful, but many private planes, like small civilian planes like a Cessna or something, are propeller driven. And you'll see jets that are used more for like commercial operations or for use in the military. But yes, we absolutely still do use propeller planes. In fact, even if you book a flight somewhere, sometimes they'll even give you one of those prop planes if you're just doing, a small commute somewhere. They're a little bumpier, I will say. You feel everything. Any other questions? How many planes do you have at the museum now? Great question. So at the Intrepid, we currently have 28 military aircraft on display. We also, of course, have the Concorde that I showed you, that commercial jet. And then, of course, in addition to that, we have our Cold War era submarine. We've got the NASA space shuttle, the Enterprise, and it's all housed within the Intrepid itself, which is a National Historic Landmark. Lots of cool stuff to see here. So hope you can come and visit and explore some of it when we do reopen. But yeah, we have 28 right now. And we're always working on new ones. We're restoring them. So tune into our channels, actually, because we are doing some aircraft restoration stuff as well. It's fun to watch. Other questions? No? All righty. All right, my friends. So if you have any other questions about our programs, you can reach out to us through our website, intrepidmuseum.org, or also through social media. I, again, would like to thank you so much for watching and sharing your questions and your comments. The museum has introduced a number of new live streams, so please do, as I mentioned, follow and subscribe to this channel, or visit our website for the latest streaming schedule as well. The links are in the comments and in the description. Also, if you're able, your donations of any amount help to keep our programs free or low cost, or you can also explore becoming a member online. So our next family program is Tuesday at 3 o'clock. It's called African Americans in Space. So join us in celebrating Black History Month as we examine the role that African Americans played in space exploration. Also, everyone, we would like to invite you. We would like to invite you, here we go, to join us next week, February 15th through 19th, during midwinter break as we celebrate our annual Kids Week. So this time we're doing it entirely virtual. Tune into our free fun programming for all ages and interests. It's between 10 and 3 p.m. every day. We're going to have dozens of live demonstrations and animal shows and workshops and performances and special guests. So full schedule of our themed daily activities can be found at intrepidmuseum.org. Our days are themed around things like science and animals and arts and music and space, of course. So definitely check that out. So, all right, everyone. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. And hopefully we will see you on an upcoming program. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next time.